This is a More Complete Beast podcast where we discover and distill strategies to drive the needle forward on your life. Whether you like it or not, you could be a victim of violent crime. So what we're doing today is we're sitting across from Daniel Contraguerro, who specializes in defending yourself in a violent situation. Couple things I want to go over before we even get into this. The first one is none of us are lawyers. Okay, you need to follow and know the law of the land. If you are confused with any of this, you need to talk to a lawyer, a police officer, preferably both, to make sure you're doing things correctly. The second thing, none of us are medical doctors. Okay, if you have any type of questions about the anatomy and physiology on what we're talking about and you want real professional medical advice, then you need to talk to a medical professional. Danny is a professional in self-defense, and that's the predominant point of this podcast. Every firearm we have here has been double checked, triple checked, quadruple checked. There are no live rounds in it. There's no live rounds near these weapons. Lastly, if you're learning something on these podcasts, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review and share this podcast. It continues to grow, and that's because you're sharing it and you're leaving reviews. So please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this, and make sure you share this podcast. Without further ado, Daniel Contraguerro. Danny, the first thing I got to ask you, man, is who are you and why should we listen to you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, guys.
For sure.
I'm excited for this. So my name's Daniel Contraguerro. I run the Defense Lab, where we do self-defense and combatives. It's primarily based on wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I like to say that we provide realistic solutions to modern day threats. So we cover empty-handed skills. We also cover weapons. So guns, knives, whether that's you carrying a gun or a knife as a defender, or the attacker trying to pull something out on you, trying to take your gun or knife off of you.
There's a lot of people that are probably starting to get into this podcast and they're thinking, I don't really need this, right? Because once action starts, I just see red, bro. Like I know bodies are going to hit the floor and I'm just violent as hell. So why is it that it seems like every dude thinks they can fight? One of the funniest things is when somebody walks into a boxing class or jiu-jitsu class for the first time and they're like, you know what I mean? They might lift weights and they might be a cop because they can body a crackhead and like pit Karen. They're like, dude, I'll kick the shit out of someone. Why is it that everybody thinks they can fight when in reality, nobody can fight? Nobody knows how to fight.
Yeah, this is such a funny thing. I know we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Especially when stuff kind of goes viral, starts going around. People are like, well, I just would have done this, or that's why I carry a gun.
Right.
And I don't think I have an exact answer as to why that's a thing. But my theory is, fighting is very primitive. It's deeply attached to our masculinity, our ego. And I think because of that, some people have truly convinced themselves that they can fight even though they have no training. It's the same thing with guns as just like empty-handed fighting. You have people that, they see, there was that mall someone was shooting up a mall a few months back.
Yeah.
And a kid hit like a 40-yard shot or something and took this guy out. People are like, yep, that's why I carry my gun. It's like, you shoot a box of ammo a year. Like, let's go to the range under no pressure and put a target 40 feet away or 40 yards away.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to hit it, right? Under no pressure. And I think that's a big thing with training, a big advantage to training. Not only do you get to build your skills, but you also get realistic expectations and your limitations. Like for me at 40 yards, it's like I'm not sending shots across a mall packed full of people. Like I'm either going to try to get out of there if I want to take this guy out. I need to move closer because I train, I know my limitations, I know where I can accurately hit somebody from, especially when you're under pressure like that.
Yeah, it is part of, so everybody can fight.
Yes.
Everybody can pull a trigger, but people vastly overestimate how accurate they are and how tough they are. So it's like, you can fight. And like you said, it's attached to your masculinity. It's attached to human nature. We've been fighting literally forever.
Yeah.
There's that Instagram we all followed, Nature is Metal. Like it's ingrained in species is combat. But just because you can do it doesn't mean that you're good at it.
Exactly.
Yeah, you never know how good you are until you stack yourself up against a professional then you find out real fast.
Exactly.
Real fast.
I was telling you, I think I've done some USPSA, they're just shooting competitions, all handgun shooting competitions. You go in there and they involve some movement, and it's timed. It's your score is based on your time and your accuracy. And I'm looking at some of these guys. I'm like, I train, a decent bit, and I'm looking at these guys, and there's some older guys there. I'm like, I'm in much better shape than these guys. I can run faster. I can move faster than these guys. And you get like absolutely smoked by some guy that you just like see walking through the Walmart. He's like an older guy.
Yeah.
He's not in bad shape, but not in great shape. And it's like, he just is so much more efficient.
He just shoots like fucking Rambo.
Yeah. And these are local competitions. These aren't national matches. So training, you got to train, especially when you apply pressure to it. You don't rise to the occasion. You typically fall to your training when we add pressure.
Let's talk about training, because there's a huge debate with this. Like Top G, Andrew Tate, he's like, jiu-jitsu shit in a street fight. You want to be good at kickboxing. That way you can stand on your feet. You can keep people at a distance if you have multiple attackers. And then you have, literally 1993 or whatever it was, the Gracies came out, and their entire point of UFC 1, 2, and 3, that tournament style fighting, was to showcase jiu-jitsu as the superior fighting art. So if somebody wants to get into training for self-defense application, is there a specific martial art that they should be focused on, or is it completely all over the place?
So there's pros and cons to a lot of your martial arts, and a lot of them are better than others. There's definitely aspects to the wrestling and jiu-jitsu that I think are very beneficial to a self-defense scenario, but you have to practice them also in self-defense scenarios to see which of these techniques are actually applicable, which ones can we completely throw out the window, which ones do we need to tweak a little bit to make them work, and which ones work just how they are. For example, wrestling, I know you guys both wrestled. Wrestling's great. I think it's great to teach control. I think it's great because there's no complacency to be on the bottom. So even though you may belly out in wrestling, so you're kind of turning your back to the person, there's no complacency for being on the bottom, especially in college wrestling where there's riding time. You need to get up and you need to get out. That being said, you're not going to hit something like a Granby roll outside on the pavement, right? It's just not going to work out good for you. Same thing with jiu-jitsu. Lots of good jiu-jitsu techniques that pan out very well when we're talking about self-defense. At the same time, you throw me into anything, a guillotine, and I pull a knife out and start sticking you in the rib cage. It's, that's going to kind of take some of that away. I think a big thing where I saw this, I did jiu-jitsu for a long time where we never implemented any striking. It was just straight jiu-jitsu. And then one day we put gloves on and helmets on, and I went for a juji armbar from guard, and I got hit in the head. It's like, okay, so we added a variable. We had jiu-jitsu, which is just really a sport. We added a variable, which is punching, and now some of those techniques don't work so well anymore. And a lot of the techniques that do work, we need to contextualize them now because we can punch. We need to tweak them a little bit. The more variables we add, whether it's punching, whether it's weapons, you have a gun that you carry every day. So now you're in some altercation because some guy bumped into you and you looked at him wrong. Now there's a gun involved in this fight. That's a huge variable, right? We can't just do whatever we want that we would be doing on a mat when you have a gun on you. That this isn't a deadly force encounter, but that gun can't come out. You need to keep it in your waistband. I think the other big difference between self-defense and competition is competition's consensual, right? You walk out there on the mat, you shake hands with your opponent, there's a referee, there's a rule set that you guys are competing under. Whereas in a self-defense encounter, there's no rules, right? If you're on your back and there's a piece of asphalt broken off of the curb, you can pick that up and start using it. And the other thing, it's typically not consensual. It's usually an ambush. You don't know what's happening. This person is very close to you. They grab a hold of you, shove you up against a wall, and now they're sticking you with a knife or putting a gun in your chest or hitting you over the back of the head. A lot of people, say things like, "Oh, I would never let somebody get that close to me," and it's like, okay, maybe you wouldn't. You're probably never going to get attacked then if you're perfect at not letting people get close to you.
Right.
But that's why they're not attacking you, because they're not close to you or because you're paying attention. It's when you're not, or, you're in a crowded area and you're shoulder to shoulder with people and all of a sudden you get grabbed a hold of and hit over the head.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate that free will aspect. Like a lot of people train in these fixed games with the rules, and then as soon as you throw the rules out, it's a completely different ball game.
Exactly.
I really noticed that whenever I went to your seminar that we did a couple weeks ago. You did it at the gym. I've wrestled for a really long time. I'm very comfortable wrestling. But as soon as you added those other instruments where there's a gun in your waistband or there's a knife, it really changes the whole game. I went from being very comfortable to being very uncomfortable really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's those variables make a big difference. And typically the way I teach is we start with the least bit of variables. Neither of us have weapons. If I'm taking somebody through my progression and say private lessons, we start with no weapons, very low stress. We work through our techniques there, and then we start upping the variables. We start adding in punches that we now have to block. Then we start adding in, okay, you have a weapon on you because maybe this person that's taking lessons carries a gun on them or carries a knife on them. And now we have to control the person's hands even a little better. It's more important because we have to keep their hands away from our waistline. And then we up the variables again. They have a weapon. Maybe for right now, it's just in their waistband, but we have to keep them from getting it out. Then we up it again. That weapon's already out and they're trying to stick us with a knife now. So we kind of progress up and add in variables to make it more difficult as you get better with the technique.
So regardless of the type of martial art you're training, adding in the realistic application of self-defense is what is going to make it applicable for self-defense.
Exactly. Yes, I'd agree with that. The good thing about sport is that there's a continuation of it. There's competitions a lot. It keeps you in the room. It keeps you going. But if you're looking for self-defense or to contextualize it for self-defense, you occasionally have to be training self-defense scenarios and trying those techniques that you use in a sport context and seeing how they work.
For sure, because even just the little bit of additional variables that I added when I was doing my MMA fight, because I did jiu-jitsu for a long time, wrestled. Once you start getting hit on the ground, 85% of jiu-jitsu does not work. I mean, dude, we just saw Gary Tonin in the 1FC championship. He was going for like heel hooks and shit. He got fucking blasted and KO'd in like a minute.
Yeah.
Like he's going for heel hooks and this dude just destroyed him from the ground. It's like, well, maybe there's a reason why you don't see a ton of heel hooks in mixed martial arts. They happen.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be a time where maybe conceivably in a street fight, I hit a Berimbolo sweep and get somebody's back. Maybe. Probably not though.
Yeah.
That's like when I was getting ready for this MMA fight and we're training, it's like, holy shit, that didn't work. I got blasted. That didn't work. And before you know it, it's like, wow, there's like 8 techniques I can use effectively. Probably 6 techniques I can use effectively because the rest of it, I'm just putting myself, the risk to reward ratio just wasn't there when you start adding in that element, that unpredictability of getting punched when it comes to jiu-jitsu. And I think that's reason, just to get a little bit into the history of jiu-jitsu, like when I was competing all the time, leg locks, if you did leg locks, you were like a piece of shit. Like if you were hitting heel hooks and stuff back in like 2012, that was just not what you did in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I think it's because jiu-jitsu, while it was becoming a sport, was still very connected to the raw nature of combat. So nobody really trained leg locks. And if you got hit with a leg lock in a competition or somebody was shooting leg locks on the competition, they were dirty. They were seen as dirty. Like Gordon Ryan just put something out on his Instagram where he was talking about like, it's a video of him back when he was like 16. Him and I used to compete in the same bracket. Now he's like 100 times better than me. But it was like him back in, I don't know, 2013, 2014. He was like 16 years old ripping heel hooks. And he had a big description like, this is me 10 years ago when I was hitting heel hooks and everyone thought it was dirty. Now the game is all, I mean, so much of it. Yeah, so much of it is below the waist attacks. And it's because, like you said, a lot of these combat sports have become divorced from their original intent, which was defending yourself in a real world combat situation.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people still think that it's a little more closely attached than it really is. I just read somewhere someone had wrote, and I agree with it. Jiu-jitsu, or really a lot of these sports, but jiu-jitsu is a sport that looks a lot like fighting, but it's not fighting.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get those two things confused.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's 100% true. And like I said, that's my experience with it when we started adding punch. I could only imagine a knife. Like you said, am I going to hit a guillotine choke if a dude's knifing me in the ribs? Probably not. I mean, unless I can strangle him before he literally spills my guts in the street. Like it's a gruesome thought, but it's kind of the reality of combat as it exists. It's unpredictable. Like Zach said, it's that free will element of getting hit with a piece of asphalt or stabbed in the rib cage.
Yeah.
Before we get too far down, like the actual combat, which I definitely want to talk about. I want to talk about hand-to-hand, knives, guns, all that stuff. What are some of the steps? Like, how can you avoid that situation in general? How can you not be a victim and just avoid that situation before you're even attacked? Are there any principles that people can follow walking around the street, or what can they do to not be seen as a victim before that bad actor actually attacks them? Is there anything they can do in that respect?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're walking around, keep your chin up, head up, shoulders back, look like you know where you're going. Don't look like a victim. Try to get deselected out of an attack. So people, just like animals, when they're going after something, they want the weakest one, right? They want that injured fawn, right? That they're gonna take for dinner. And it's the same thing with people. So your job here, get deselected out of the attack. Don't look like a victim. Look like you know where you're going.
Part of that has to be too, just like outside of how you carry yourself, just your how physically imposing you are. Like if I see some 4'11" like girl, right? And if you told me to, and I'm not obviously going to attack anybody, but if you told me, hey, you got to attack one of these two people. One of them's a 6'4" dude with 2 cauliflower ears. The other one's a 4'11" girl that's 100 pounds. And you're like, you got to rob one of these people. Who are you going to rob?
Exactly.
I mean, it's very simple. It's just a logical explanation of why some people get attacked.
Exactly. Other things, headphones in at night. I used to be in Oakland where I went to school, and it'd be 11 o'clock at night and a girl would be running with like headphones in. And we're not in a great area of the city,
right.
and it really wasn't a great area of Oakland either. And nobody deserves to be a victim.
Right.
But there are some things that you do to set yourself up to not be a victim, and there's some things that you do that make you look more vulnerable. And while it's not right, there's people out there that are going to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. So
come across when you're in any environment, really, come across as somebody that's paying attention and somebody that's competent, and you're taking steps to deselect yourself from the criminal element of society.
Yep, exactly. When people are approaching you, when people are talking to you, you have to be firm, right? You can't be super passive, letting this person get in, keep getting closer to you, keep getting their way. They see that and they feed off of that, and it keeps snowballing even bigger. I think the other thing is try to de-escalate stuff and avoid stuff, right? There's people out there that are willing to commit murder to defend their ego, right? So these people don't necessarily think like you and I think. You accidentally bump into somebody thinks you gave them a wrong look. You're going to be a lot better off de-escalating that situation, saying, my bad, and getting out of there. You turn around and you give this guy a look, you say something to him now, because maybe you bumped into him by accident, he said something to you. Now you're rolling around on the ground with some guy, and he's stabbing you to death with a $5 gas station knife. Now you're laying bleeding out on the street because you couldn't say, hey, my bad, sorry about that. And you see that stuff happen all the time, ego battles, and lots of people lose their life over ego battles.
And it's because, like you said, so much of America is isolated from the level of violence that somebody is willing to perpetrate against them. I mean, there's people out there that will kill you, literally kill you, because you gave them the side eye. They probably don't have as much to lose as everybody in this room right now. But there is a subsection of the population that's capable of violence that I think most people are not only aren't they willing to do the same thing, they don't even understand that there are people out there willing to do that to them.
Exactly. And we didn't cover this at the beginning, but so I've studied around 2,500 real life violent encounters that were caught on tape. And there's security cameras in almost every public place, whether you're inside or outside on a street corner. With the internet, you can find these videos from down the street to across the whole world. By studying these videos, it's given me a very realistic idea of how these attacks actually happen. You start to see trends, things like how they happen, when they happen, where they happen, how many people are involved, what kind of weapons are involved, when they get produced. And after studying all those, the ego battle is one of the big things that I've recognized. Is I've seen so many people get severely injured or killed because of something stupid. Somebody takes a parking space, somebody runs into somebody, looks at them wrong, and then all of a sudden the person turns, instead of just saying my bad, they have to say something to them, the other person says something back, and now they're in an all-out fight, getting their head kicked into the ground or getting shot.
Yeah, see, I got to work on that. Because I'd fight somebody over a parking spot for sure. But I mean, in reality, should I be? Probably not. It's probably not worth it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we briefly talked, you brought this up, or I brought this up rather, like if I'm going to attack somebody and I'm faced with a 6'4" dude with cauliflower ears or a 4'11" girl that's 100 pounds, I'm going to victimize that girl all day long. Not saying I would, just saying that's, if I had to, that's who I'm going to rob.
That's the snippet right there that's going to get cut up and taken out of
right.
context.
Yeah, that's going to be taken out.
If you were Joe Rogan, that's the one right there that's going to get you canceled.
CNN will put that on and they'll say Alex Wallace is going to attack a 4'11" girl.
Yeah.
So just so people know, and so I know, because I can relay this information to my wife and to the females in my family, is there a difference in self-defense between a woman and a man? I know that's not politically correct, but let's be realistic here, right? We are different sexes with different capabilities. There's a reason why when barbarians are at the gates, we don't say, oh, send the women and children to fight. Like, we've never done that ever. We still don't do that. Like, combat roles are filled with men. Combat death is always men. Almost always men. It's like 99% of combat death is men. So what does self-defense look like? What's the difference between a female trying to defend themselves versus a man trying to defend themselves?
Yeah. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be male or female. I've definitely trained with women that are bigger and stronger than a lot of the men I've trained with.
Yeah.
it could be men and women. It could be just somebody that's smaller in stature. There's a lot of small guys. I'm not necessarily that big of a guy myself. I'm 5'11", 185 pounds. I go against guys that are 225. It makes a difference. That size, height, and weight do make a huge difference. There's a reason that in any combat sport, whether it's wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu, there's weight classes. And those weight classes are usually pretty contained. They're pretty small weight classes because it makes a big difference. So it may be somebody that's a man or a woman. It may be somebody that's a lot smaller than your average person, or on the very young end of the spectrum or the very old end of the spectrum. Those people are generally more vulnerable. And as far as techniques, defending yourself, the techniques are pretty much the same. But what I would say is the level of violence and the rate at which you progress up your continuum of force needs to be quicker if you're in a more vulnerable group. You can make less mistakes, right? So, Alex, you can take a punch and keep going much easier than somebody that maybe is 5 foot and weighs 100 pounds, because they can't take that. They may be get knocked out from that punch. You may be able to take that punch and keep fighting back. So if you're more vulnerable, you have to do more things right. You can't let people get as close to you, right? Distance buys you time. Time buys you options. The more distance I can put between me and them, the more options I have, right? Whether it's just strictly distance or putting something between you and I, whether it's a car, a desk, a counter, something like that. So you have to move up that force continuum quicker. And you also have to be able to escalate your violence higher and faster. So when this person becomes a little bit more aggressive with you, a little bit more violent with you, you need to get way more violent, way more aggressive, and way faster, because you can't take that risk of, getting hit or getting grabbed a hold of where maybe you're not strong enough to get somebody's hands off of you.
Does the law recognize... wait, before I ask this, nobody in this room is a lawyer. If you have any questions about the law, you should talk to your lawyer.
Yep.
So don't take this as legal advice, but based off of your research and understanding of the law, does the law also look at that as being acceptable? So for instance, like if I get punched in the face and I slice somebody's throat, that's really gruesome. But let's say that happens. Is that looked at the same way as if a girl is getting, her head caved in and she has to stab this dude to stop it?
Yeah, so again, none of us are legal professionals. That being said, I have talked to various different legal experts in this field, and I try to teach and train in conjunction with what my best understanding of the law is. So what constitutes deadly force, so if we're talking on deadly force, is threat of death or grave bodily harm. So that is going to be different depending on the person's vulnerability. An 85-year-old lady versus one of you two, or me, or a 14-year-old girl versus one of us three.
Yeah.
Right? Or what is threatening death or grave bodily harm to us is going to be a lot different for one of those people.
Totally different, for sure.
It's same thing goes with multiple attackers. So it's one-on-one versus 4 guys hop out of a car and pin you up against a wall on the sidewalk. That's going to be different than if just one person, puts their hands up and starts trying to fight you.
So judged by 9 or carried by 6 or whatever that rap lyrics is. Use your discretion, obviously. Talk to a lawyer, obviously.
Yes. Talk to a professional in the legal field about the legal questions on that. But that's generally, based on my understanding, how it's looked at.
Okay, cool. Let's say, I do have an attacker. Like, give me your wallet. Do you have any principles to follow on when you should comply versus when it's go time? Like, I'm fighting you to the bitter end. Is there any type of general rule that you follow in that respect?
Compliance is a personal choice. I would say you can comply. Compliance doesn't necessarily guarantee your safety. I've seen lots of situations where people comply fully and they make it out of the situation unharmed. I've seen situations where people comply fully and they end up getting severely injured or killed. And I've also seen situations where people never even get that chance to comply before they're injured or killed. I've seen on multiple occasions video of someone getting run up on, stabbed until they hit the ground, and then getting their backpack or purse straps cut off of them before the person runs away with their bag. So compliance is definitely an option. Doesn't guarantee your safety though. One thing, rule with the compliance though, is you must either fight back fully or comply fully. Where I see people get hurt most is when they try to half comply, half fight back, right? They don't really want to give up their wallet, or they don't really want to go with somebody wherever they want to go. They don't really want to fight back either. Usually gets the person pretty mad, and they usually face pretty severe consequences from that. On the idea of either fighting back fully or complying fully, that doesn't mean you can't purposefully comply. So what purposeful compliance would be is complying in order to put yourself in a better situation to fight back. So maybe some guy pulls a gun out on me and I give him my wallet so that I can create space, get a better angle to get my own gun out.
Like throw it away almost, like throw it like behind him or something.
Yes, so something like that would be purposeful compliance. You're complying so that you can give yourself a better chance to either escape or to fight back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because why, like you said, something you said was what, distance gives opportunity?
Yeah, distance buys you time and time buys you options.
So if you can use your compliance to create that distance, now you have more options.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And the only other thing with compliance, kind of the only strict rule I have with compliance is somebody trying to take you to a secondary location. So they pull a weapon out on you and try to get you to go back into an alley, try to pull you into a building, or try to put you into a car. The only reason that they're taking you to a different location is because the secondary location is more secluded than the first location. In that case, I would say fight back, die on that sidewalk if you have to not get taken to that secondary location. If they're willing to kill you on the city street for not getting into a car with them, they were going to kill you on the country road where they're taking to you after they do whatever horrible thing they're planning on doing.
Probably worse. They're going to torture you. You're going to suffer, and then you're going to die. Better off just getting blasted right then and there.
Exactly.
One thing that I think is really interesting, and I think it fits in perfectly right where we are in the conversation, is, and this is something new that I learned from you actually from being at your seminar, is that just because you have a weapon doesn't mean you should always show it. You have to kind of understand where you are in that vulnerability level, like you said, because the moment that you present a weapon, you introduce it into the fight. Whereas if your attacker didn't know you have a weapon, it's not a variable that is introduced into the fight. This was really interesting to me and something new. Can you touch on how that would act in this certain scenario?
Yeah. So once that weapon's out, you've shown your cards, you've shown what you have. I really don't believe in defensive display of a firearm. So that would be somebody that maybe isn't a deadly threat yet, and you're pulling your gun out defensively, displaying it to stop them from attacking you. But you may not be at a point yet that constitutes deadly force. So now your gun's out and you can't shoot this person. And I've trained with a guy that years ago, before we started training, he was walking down the street. He had multiple guys run up on him. And the thing you guys have to remember, these people don't necessarily think like you do. He had multiple guys run up on him. He pulled his gun out on them, presented it at them. And they were young kids, not children, but they were, maybe older teenagers, early 20s. And the kid stopped, and the one kid said to him, "You think I've never looked down the barrel of a gun before?" And the guys ended up leaving. So was it successful? Yes, it was successful. But if that kid was close enough to grab a hold of that gun, now you're in a fight over your gun. Someone's probably going to end up getting shot because you pulled that gun out. So it's hard to say. If the people do run away like they did in that situation, I would consider that successfully defending yourself. Mm-hmm. But I've seen defensive use of a firearm turn bad before. Somebody pulls a gun out way too early, and then it ends up getting taken off of them.
Cool. So basically, I just want to recap on what we talked about so far, because I think this is a lot of good information. I'm taking notes myself. First thing is, try to deselect yourself from the victim paradigm. You do that by being aware of your surroundings and walking in a way that shows competence and confidence. Outside of that, you should also be training with some element of combat if that's your goal. So if you're doing jiu-jitsu, I don't know how often, but at least every once in a while, presumably, I know you do seminars. We'll get into your business at the end, but have some element of this is how this works in a combat situation, so you have your go-to. Also understand your limitations of being a man versus a woman, being old versus being young, being tough versus really not being tough. You know what I mean? And understanding that you need to escalate that force continuum much faster if you're much more vulnerable to violence. And then lastly, when you have to comply versus fight, that's a personal choice, but understand compliance doesn't guarantee safety. And there's one situation where you absolutely should never comply. Never go with the attacker. Fight to the bitter end. Yeah. I miss anything with that?
No, that was good. And I think when we're talking about, say you train jiu-jitsu and you want to try every once in a while contextualizing that for a self-defense scenario, you have to be realistic. Find some videos online. Try to recreate those situations, and the attacker can't be playing jiu-jitsu with you. They have to act like an attacker. I've run into this before when I first started doing seminars, and it was something I had to work through, where the person that was being the attacker was just kind of grabbing a hold of the person and trying to stop them from whatever they were doing. Well, that's not what these attacks look like. The attacks are violent. They're fast. They're pulling knives out. They're fast stabbing you. They're hammering you with punches as they're trying to run you over. So you have to be realistic in that aspect. The attacker has to be a good attacker. And the other thing is, if you carry a gun on you every day and you do jiu-jitsu and your plan is, hey, I'm going to use my jiu-jitsu to get my gun out if I need to. Well, you every once in a while need to get your holster, get a blue gun, just a plastic inert gun, and put it in the holster and do your jiu-jitsu and see how that actually would play out instead of just thinking about it in your head.
Yeah, I think that's an important element that I'm not doing. Like, I've been boxing a lot and my hands are getting crispier, but at the same time, like, am I really going to be doing like a shoulder roll in a street fight? Probably not. You know what I mean? So I should probably just focus on the element of throwing a few, straight punches and then like getting to my weapon, or a few straight punches, kick the dude in the chest and then hightail it out of there. So right now I'm like feeling myself, you know what I mean? Doing like a shoulder roll, doing like this shit. But in reality, I'll probably just get either taken down, kicked, or stabbed if I'm doing that. So I think that's something I need to implement a little more often. What about, there's obvious places people get attacked, right? So like if you're a drug dealer, if you're in like a horribly crime-ridden area, then you're what's the word I'm looking for? Almost paranoia has to be a little bit higher baseline all the time. But for people who live, in middle-class America, are there specific areas where their level of paranoia should be a little bit higher than in other situations? Because obviously in here, you know, everybody in here, our level of paranoia is extremely low, or awareness, whatever you want to call it. Is there elements in everyday middle America society where people should kind of level up a little bit and pay a little more attention than they normally do?
Yeah, so if you look at the FBI crime statistics for violent crime over the past 10 years, you'll see about 50% of these violent crimes happen in a home. So outside of the home, where the majority of your crimes are happening, are outside on the street, more commonly in cities where there's sidewalks and people are actually walking around. So streets, sidewalks, alleyways, and then gas stations, convenience stores. I usually say if you're not doing illegal activities, you're not buying drugs, the most dangerous place that you probably go is, you know, walking through the city to, you know, take your wife to dinner, going to work, walking through the city from the parking lot, or getting gas when you're pumping gas. So
why a gas station?
Sorry.
Why the gas station? Why is that so dangerous?
What I see is places that have easy access to come and go. That is more typically where crimes happen. We were talking about right by the gym, there's a gas station, and you can hop right on 22, you can hop right on 66, you can do something, somebody could do something very bad and get moving very quickly in either directions, and you can get pretty far away quickly. So that's where you see a lot of these kinds of crimes happen. One tip I have, like when you're pumping gas, and I try to not tell anybody to or expect people to do anything crazy. I know you guys live regular lives. I live probably a much more regular life than I think a lot of people think. People sometimes think that I'm like super hyper aware, like overanalyzing everything. Try to do that for a week and you'll probably quit within an hour. It's exhausting, right? You have to live your life. But so I try to give simple tips, you know, so one thing at a gas station, pull the gas tank of your car up to the hose, right? When you put the pump into your car, just standing at the back bumper. That way you have a lot more room to move around. If somebody starts approaching you, you can move actually around your car and that gas pump to put some objects and distance between you and them. Where I see stuff go bad a lot at gas stations is, and this is typically how people pump gas, they put the pump into their car and they stand between the mirror and the hose. People come in from the front side of the car and now you're fighting someone stuck between them, the hose, the car, and the gas pump. There's not a lot of places to go.
You're cornered.
Exactly. So if you put the gas pump into your car, stand at the back bumper, just look around. You know, there's that lock on the gas pump. You don't have to be standing there holding it. Just stand at the back bumper, look around, see what's going on. Things you're looking for, there's like situational awareness is a buzzword that people never really explain what that even means. You know, have situational awareness. It's like, okay, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Right.
I think situational awareness is the easiest way to define it and actually practice it is, what is everybody else doing? Is there somebody doing something that everybody else is not doing? Right? So is there something out of the ordinary? So when I see somebody running, right? And say I'm walking around, I'm in college, I'm walking around in Oakland and somebody's running. Okay, are they running with headphones on and gym shorts and a t-shirt and sneakers? Or are they running in like jeans and work boots and they look panicked, right? There's a big difference there.
Yeah.
And
right.
The one person's exercising, the other person's running from something. And that is situational awareness. What's out of the norm here? Why does that person, you know, it's 85 degrees out. Why does this person have a hoodie on? Or why do they have a duffel bag in here? Right? We're walking around Walmart and this guy in the aisle in front of me has a duffel bag. Well, look around. Does anybody else have a duffel bag? No. That's situational awareness. And I think that's the easiest way to explain situational awareness and actually practice it.
And I think there's something to be said about your instincts too. Like we've evolved to be the top of the food chain. And for whatever reason, we don't trust our instincts anymore. Like I notice that when I have a bad feeling about someone or something, it's not always right, but there's a reason why I'm having that feeling. And I think people ignore that to their own detriment. And I understand sometimes that can be not politically correct, right? Because if you just feel a certain way and it's a guy, you know, you might see, oh, that lady's a sexist because she crossed the road as soon as a guy was walking down the street. But it's like, well, at the same time, like, I understand that that's not politically correct, but it's also worse to get, you know, robbed, beat up, raped. things like that. So being able to not always trust your instincts, and not to the point where, like you said, it's paranoia, but at least have an element of, wait a second, something doesn't sit right here. There's a reason for that. Like I said, there's millions and millions and millions of years of evolution that occur between our ears, and we ignore it to our own detriment.
Right. If you have a bad feeling, it doesn't mean you need to act on it,
right,
but it doesn't mean you should ignore it.
Yeah. Exactly. Just have maybe you perk up a little bit. Okay, something's different here.
Yeah. There's a really good book by Gavin DeBecker. It's called The Gift of Fear. And it talks a lot about that, and it tells a lot of stories. It's a really good read. I've read it a couple of times. I've recommended it to a lot of people. And while I don't agree with everything that the author has opinions on, especially with some other things related to firearms, things like that, but his book is very good. And it talks a lot about trusting your instinct, and it goes through stories of people that did do that or didn't do that, and bad stuff ended up happening to them.
So you brought up firearms. Let's start to talk a little bit about weapons, because I think we covered the hand-to-hand stuff with the find a way to train and introduce a realistic element of combat to it if your goal is self-defense. When we talk about, let's start with guns, right? When we talk about firearms in general, is there a type of gun you think people should carry, a brand of gun, anything that maybe the layman listening to this should know before they go out and purchase and carry a firearm?
Yeah, so guns are a really good force multiplying tool. They are an equalizer, right? You could be maybe smaller and weaker than somebody, and that gun is a good equalizer for you. I recommend modern striker-fired semi-automatic 9mm pistols.
We got a million of them on the table with completely unloaded.
So yeah, there's lots of good modern striker-fired pistols. I like 9mm pistols. There's a lot of research with modern self-defense hollow point ammo. There's a few good ones. Federal HST is a good one. Spear Gold Dot, and they're effective. They meet FBI standards for handgun ammunition. That's what you want to look for when you're actually looking for the round, the type of round that you're going to carry. But semi-automatic pistols, there's a lot of good subcompact guns now that hold a decent bit of ammo. I know you guys have the Springfield Hellcat and the Glock 43X. They're good guns. They're small enough that most anybody can conceal them. They hold a decent bit of ammo. I would say enough ammo that at least I would be comfortable with. And they're definitely a force multiplying tool. That being said, you can't just put it into your waistband and expect that's the end all be all. You have to get out and train with that gun. Not only training at distance, but I think you need to be doing your empty-handed training and your contact distance training, right? I can reach out and touch you. You can reach out and touch me. I think you need to be doing those, not with your live gun, but with a blue gun. And you can get a blue gun that matches exactly up with your live gun. Guns, you need to train if you want to hit with them. Put somebody at 10 yards that's never shot before, they're going to have a hard time hitting where they want to hit, even with no pressure. I've seen multiple times, tons of times in training with the sim guns. So a sim gun it's a real firearm that's been converted to fire a non-lethal marking projectile. So we train with those guns. And I've seen tons of times someone getting run down, being late punches thrown on them. They get their gun out, and at 6 inches, they miss. They fire 6 shots and miss all of them. You have to be training with those guns. It's not just going to automatically stop somebody. That being said, talking about guns versus knives, guns and knives, they both have pros and cons. They both kind of have different use cases. One thing with a gun, it does a little bit better of a job physically stopping somebody than a knife. The other thing that it does a better job at is it is psychologically taxing on the attacker. So when I see videos and guns start going off, distance typically starts spreading. I've seen situations where 3 or 4 guys run up on a defender. He gets his gun out, maybe fires off 2 rounds at one of the guys, and all of a sudden that distance starts spreading. Those guys are running, which you don't necessarily see with a knife. That being said, with a knife...
Real quick, though, before we get into knives, because what do you carry and why do you carry it?
So I carry a Glock 19. It's a 9mm pistol. The reason I carry it, it's a very reliable gun. I'm very comfortable with it. I've shot thousands of rounds through that gun in training. It's small enough that I can conceal well. It's big enough that it holds a decent bit of ammunition. It holds 15 rounds in the magazine, and like I said, it's very reliable. I trust that gun. That's a big thing. You have to trust the gun that you're carrying. And I'd be open to carrying other guns for sure, but that's what I started with. I would say if somebody's going to get one gun that they're planning on using for home defense or planning on concealed carrying, I think the Glock 19 is kind of like a jack of all trades. It's maybe not the best gun at anything, but it's reasonably priced and it can cover a lot of different areas.
Okay. So when you have that gun specifically, is there a safety on it?
So with the Glocks, you have internal safeties or passive safeties. So there's no safety that you have to actually turn off.
Okay.
But there are 3 safeties on the gun. There's a trigger safety, and then there's 2 safeties inside of it, which keep the gun from going off unless that trigger is actually pulled. As far as carrying it goes, you guys were asking some questions about carrying with a round in the chamber, not a round in the chamber. You have to trust the gun. So you have to get to the point where you trust the gun. I do always recommend people carry with a round in the chamber. The holster that you carry the gun in has to be a high quality holster. I recommend the hard-sided Kydex holster. So the sides are hard. Nothing can get into the trigger guard. The holster has to cover the trigger guard, and nothing's going to kind of press through that holster because it's hard. The holster is really the safety, that external non-passive safety on the gun. So when it's in the holster, I trust that the gun's not just going to go off because it has these internal safeties, and the holster is the external safety. If you are going to carry a gun without a round in the chamber, and I talk about this with other stuff too, there's people that, hey, they have a gun, they keep it in the truck, in the glove box, they don't want to carry it with them. You can do whatever you want. I just want to make sure you're being realistic with yourself, right? So if you're carrying a gun without a round in the chamber, or maybe you're carrying it somewhere that's not very quick to access, you just have to be realistic with yourself. So if you're on the other side of the mall and someone comes in and starts shooting the place up, you probably will have time to get that gun out, chamber around, and get after the person or use it to get to safety. But if somebody grabs a hold of you on the sidewalk, throws you to the ground, and starts stomping on your head, in that situation, you're probably not going to be able to get it out. So when people tell me different stuff, how they carry guns, where they carry guns, I tell them kind of what I believe, but it's completely up to them what they do. I just do give them a realistic idea of what to expect with their carry setup.
Based off of the 2,500 videos that you studied, have you seen videos where people try to rack that round and it was like the wrong move and they just get absolutely obliterated because of that?
Yep. I have seen people lose their life while trying to rack a round into the chamber.
Is there a point where it's like, do you notice anything with, after X amount of rounds, it's just, you're just using it for, like, you don't really need that many rounds?
The noisemaker?
Yeah, exactly.
It really depends on the situation. I've seen situations where people run when a gun is presented, when one round's fired. I've seen videos of people take lots of rounds, especially people that are under the influence of certain drugs.
Yeah.
Can take rounds, and you need to physically stop them by, causing enough damage to their body to their point where their body actually shuts down, because you're not going to psychologically stop them.
Stopping power, the big, and I don't know how true this is, but I talk to people that also carry, like, oh, you want a 45 or you want a 44 Magnum because of stopping power. Is there anything to that? A 9mm versus 380 versus a 45 versus, in reality, if I could carry just a Desert Eagle, presumably that would end the fight immediately. But like, is there really that much of a discrepancy between the round and the type of gun that you're carrying in terms of ending a fight in a self-defense situation?
So the reason that I carry 9mm and a lot of law enforcement and government agencies are turning and have in the recent years turned to 9mm. Modern 9mm rounds have this very similar ballistics as a 40 and 45. You're using good, like I said, Federal HST, Spear Gold Dot rounds like that. Those are very tested rounds. And the other thing with 9mm is versus 40 or 45, you can fit more rounds in the magazine. So in the same size gun, you can fit more ammunition. So you can have more follow-up shots. And there's also less recoil in 9mm than 40 or 45. So you can not only have more follow-up shots, but you can have faster follow-up shots. You can get back on target a little faster.
Do we all have 9s?
Yeah.
Every single person in here has a 9? Okay, good. Well, then I mean we accidentally did the right thing.
I wanted to take it back 1 second and ask about the conversation we've had of whether you carry with a round or whether you don't carry with a round. You have a Glock 19. It does not have a safety on it. It has the internal safeties. It has the trigger safety, but it doesn't have a manual safety that you have to disengage before you can fire the gun. Was there ever a time whenever you were carrying your gun that you didn't carry one in the chamber? And when did you start to feel confident enough? And what did you do to feel confident enough in order to start carrying one in the chamber with you?
So I've always carried. I went the day I turned 21. I went and got my concealed carry permit, and I started carrying. I've carried every day. I'm sure there's been some days that I didn't, but I carry my gun every single day, and I've always carried with a round in the chamber. Like I said, the big thing is trusting that gun. That gun isn't going to go off unless the trigger gets pulled. One thing that'll get you more comfortable with your gun is just training with it and handling it. So getting into a room where there's no live ammunition, working your dry fire. So make sure all live ammo's cleared out, the magazines out of the gun, the chamber's clear, there's no ammunition in the gun, getting all the live ammunition out of the room, dry firing that gun. So rack the slide, find something on the wall. You can use a light switch, outlet cover, presenting it out, pulling the trigger, racking the slide again, reset the trigger, and doing that again. Working your draw with a dry gun. You can do this with a blue gun too. Drawing your gun from your holster, presenting it out, getting your sight picture, pulling the trigger back into the holster. And when you're doing this with a live gun, again, all the live ammunition's cleared out of the room, you would hear if that gun went off, right? So when you put it back into your holster, you'd hear the click if that trigger got pulled. You'd hear the firing pin falling. So I think things like that, and just handling the gun, putting empty magazines in and out of the gun, racking the slide, just getting more comfortable with that to the point where you realize that firearm's just a tool. It's a tool like a hammer. It's a tool like a screwdriver. It's just that you're weaponizing that tool. So the gun, it's inanimate, right? It's not going to do anything without you first taking an action on it. So I think the more you handle the gun, the more you get out and train, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more you'll learn to trust that gun.
One thing I found interesting too, and that you and I were talking about off camera, had to do with additional ammunition on you. I know you were working with a guy who basically said he's never seen that be necessary in a self-defense situation. So I think that's good to highlight too.
Yeah. So a lot of people carry another magazine on them or two. I personally, when I first started carrying, I did carry an extra magazine. I kept researching, studying these videos, and I did some classes with a guy that has watched and studied many, many more and broken down many more self-defense encounters than I have. And what he said, and this was accurate with what I had also found, is this isn't considering law enforcement encounters, but in civilian encounters, neither of us had ever seen a civilian reload their gun in the middle of a gunfight to the point where it made a difference in the outcome. So there have been some situations where, you know, the defender maybe shoots 6 times, the guy's run off, and now he's there alone, and he reloads his gun with his extra magazine, so his gun's topped off, so his magazine's topped off in case those guys were to come back. But in no videos that I've studied, or this guy that I've taken some seminars from has studied, has he ever seen, or have we ever seen it make a difference in the outcome of the fight. So at that point, I stopped carrying an extra magazine. I keep an extra big magazine in the car full of defensive ammo. It's easy to carry around. You know, it's in the car, and you may have something more extended in the car, like an extended time frame of a defensive encounter, where I may want that bigger magazine or extra ammunition. But I opted to take it off, start carrying in a holster that didn't have another magazine attached to it. And 2 reasons for that. 1 was I just never found any evidence where it was needed. And 2, it really upped my mobility. I started realizing, you know, life's not just like self-defense encounters aren't just shooting somebody at 20 feet away. Big portion of these videos that I'm studying, these guys are grabbing hold of each other, getting thrown to the ground. They're wrestling, they're grappling. And without that extra magazine on me, I was able to move around and fight empty-handed a lot better because I had a lot more mobility. So a lot more, at least for me with my body type, I had a lot more mobility without an extra magazine, and the benefit of being able to move, to be able to fight and be able to run faster, be able to jump, that outweighed the reward of carrying an extra magazine.
People that carry guns oftentimes, I noticed this for me at first, I always felt like somebody was looking at me. You know what I mean? Like I'd go into a store, I'm like, fuck, everybody knows I have a gun in here. Holy shit. Like everybody can, I'm imprinting on this gun so much. Is that just paranoia from the person that carries the gun? Or is it like, holy shit, that guy has a gun? Cause I'll be honest, dude, I carry a gun and I go to all over the place, rental properties, stores, I don't know who's carrying a gun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, there's so many people that are insecure about carrying the gun because like this person knows I'm carrying a gun. Is my observation of it being unrealistic to think everyone knows you have a gun? Is that true? Or is it just like...
So first off, you're not the only person. I don't think there's anybody that started carrying a gun that wasn't like, everybody, this is obvious, everybody knows I have a gun on me. I know that was such a big thing for me.
Yeah, and it makes you insecure too.
Yes. Yeah, and you're just waiting for someone to like say something.
Yeah, be like,
say
hey,
something
that guy's a gun.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. It's like, I've never seen that ever.
Tackled in the Home Depot.
Yeah.
I would say most people are way too distracted with life to notice, unless it's extremely egregious, right?
Yeah.
Most people aren't going to notice. I've seen some kind of social experiments when people walk around even with like open carrying their firearm. So it's like in a holster, not concealed on their hip, and people walking by and don't notice. And I would always recommend you conceal your gun, but
why is that? Why should people conceal instead of open carry?
I don't want to show my cards, right? I don't want to be the first one to get shot because I'm the biggest threat.
Yeah.
When I'm standing in line at the gas station and some guy comes in to rob the place, right? And he sees me with my gun and then he shoots me in the head before I even see him walk in, so he can rob the place. You want to try to be the most dangerous person in the room, but you don't want anybody else to know that you are. You don't want to be the target. So I recommend you conceal your gun. But no, most people aren't going to notice you're concealing a gun. If they do see you printing a little bit, like especially if you're carrying appendix. That being said, I recently, probably within the past 2 years, have really tried to start looking for people carrying guns. And when you really try, and there's certain things you can look for when people stand up or get in and out of their cars. A lot of times you'll see people pull their shirt down over their gun. They'll tap on it to kind of make sure it's there, make sure their shirt's over top of it, things like that. The more I've looked for people carrying guns, the more I've seen how many people carry guns. And it's something I never noticed before. And that's another reason I think people don't notice, is because when I wasn't looking for it, I always thought even once I started carrying a gun and I wasn't looking for it on other people, I'm thinking I'm the only person in here that's carrying a gun. And ever since I started being really conscious of it and really looking for people, I kind of make it just like a game with myself. It's like I get a little, reward for myself when I notice somebody's carrying a gun. People are carrying a gun all over the place. I was getting my haircut yesterday, and the barber next to me, I noticed he had a gun. I was in Walmart a few months ago. The guy in front of me, and I'm standing in the checkout line. The guy in front of me reaches down into his cart, and I can see the clip from his holster on his belt, the bottom of it. It's like, okay, the guy in front of me has a gun. There's people all over the place carrying guns. One thing I do see more, and we can talk about the advantages of carrying in different positions around your waistline, but and I may be biased here because maybe more people carry behind the hip at like 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock, but I see more guns that are at the hip or behind the hip than I see in appendix carry. And like I said, those results might be skewed because maybe more people are carrying at the hip or behind the hip. But a lot more rare do I see people carrying in appendix position. Okay.
Is there an advantage or disadvantage based off of where you're going to carry your gun, or is it just preference?
I think the appendix position, so that's going to be up front of your body, in front of your hips, is the best position to carry.
Yeah, it makes, because you can defend that. better?
Yes, there's a lot of reasons. One, I think it conceals better, especially if you're somebody that has a bigger chest than stomach. So if your chest sticks out further than your stomach, your shirt's going to drape off over your chest, and that's going to conceal that gun a lot more than maybe if it was somewhere else on your body. You can look down and see, oh, my shirt's covering my gun. I didn't just bend over to pick something up, and now my gun's out. The butt of my gun's out. Where I'll see that. I'll be walking around outside, I'll be in a store, and I'll see the butt of somebody's gun out of their shirt, and they probably don't even realize it. I've tried carrying at the hip or behind the hip, and I was in total paranoia mode. Always pulling down my shirt. I always thought that gun was out. Always thought that it was printing real bad. Whereas when I have it up front, I can see where it's at. I can see that my shirt's covering it. One other thing is I believe that it's faster, at least for me. Everybody's body's going to be a little bit different. If you've carried at or behind the hip for 30 years and you're training consistently, drawing from the holster, yeah, you're going to be faster at the hip than if you first move over to appendix carry. But I think for somebody starting out, appendix carry is a little bit quicker, easier to conceal. But the biggest reason is it's much easier to defend and to get out in an entangled fight. And that's my specialty, right? My specialty isn't shooting at 10-yard, 20, 30-yard marksmanship. It's, hey, we're in a fight and you're trying to get a gun out, or I'm trying to get my gun out, or there's a knife involved and we're in close contact here. We can each grab a hold of each other. We might be standing, we might be on the ground. Maybe I have you pushed up against a car, and that's where we're fighting over weapons. And that's really where I specialize in. And in those sorts of situations, the appendix carry position, it's a lot easier to defend your gun, and it's a lot easier to get it out. I've had people in live training and I've done this myself as well. One thing to preface this is when you're doing realistic training, there's things that aren't textbook that work, right? Something that somebody probably wouldn't teach you or tell you should do that end up working. And I've done this myself. I've seen lots of other people do this, even people that it's their first time training. We're 4 hours deep into a seminar and they're right-handed, their right hand's, stuck, it's tangled up, securing this person, and they reach across with their left hand and pull their gun out because it's in appendix. So they're able to still get that gun out when they need it out. And again, this is not textbook. This isn't something that I'd recommend relying on.
Right. But function over form in a self-defense situation.
Exactly. When it's life or death, you're going to do what you need to do. And I've seen that work a lot in the appendix position, and you're not going to be able to reach across behind your opposite hip and get your gun out if that's where it is.
It's almost like an art. Just like wrestling, just like boxing, just like jiu-jitsu. You may learn the fundamentals. You might be taught things that are tried and true. They're going to work, but over time you adapt to what, one, you're good at, and what sticks, and two, what might not work, but what you're good at.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's, like you said, just to relate it to jiu-jitsu and wrestling, like no two arm bars look the exact same. You know what I mean? Like if I'm hitting an arm bar in a competition, it's probably very similar, right? There's a lot of crossover there. But it might not be it's not the exact same arm bar as I hit on the guy in the previous match, right? The lead up to that arm bar, the position that he's giving me, my ability to control him, his strength level, all of that's a little bit different. So there's principles to follow, but sometimes giving yourself the options necessary is going to give you the opportunity to have the self-defense outcome that you're looking for, namely surviving, getting away, and ending the threat.
Yeah. And Zach, to kind of go off of what you said, you do what you're good at, right? There's a bias there with people that teach self-defense, right? If you were a boxer, if that's your main background, you're going to teach defenses that primarily work off of an attack that you can punch the person. If you have a wrestling background like I have, you have a bias. You're going to set attacks up in ways and defenses up in ways that work for more of a wrestling base. And I try to be very aware of that and try to not have that bias and try to set my situations up based off of reality, based off these videos that I've studied. But there is always going to be some sort of bias. You do want to do what you're best at.
Right. Like if I get attacked on the street, my first instinct isn't going to be that now I'm a kickboxer. Now I'm Bobby Murda or Andrew Tate, and I'm going to start throwing kicks. I'm probably going to try to wrestle the guy first. So, it is an art.
Yes.
It's an art.
And that's why I think it needs to be practiced outside of just practicing jiu-jitsu or just practicing wrestling. You need to practice these combatives, right? Hey, we live in a weapons-based environment. We live in the United States of America. You can go get a concealed carry permit and you can carry, USA, baby.
Yep.
You can carry a gun. There's people out there, whether they're doing it legally or illegally, there's guns out on the street. Like I said, I've really probably about the past 2 years been trying to look for people carrying guns. There's lots of people out there that have guns on them. So you get into some sort of physical altercation, whether it's like, you bumped into somebody or somebody's just trying to attack you. There's a good chance somebody has legally or illegally a gun in their waistband or a knife in their waistband. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Lots of people have been killed with $150 guns. Lots of people have been killed with $5 gas station knives or a $2 Walmart, paring knife, a kitchen knife.
That's good. Because we talked about guns now for 20 minutes. Let's wrap up the guns. Let's talk about knives. But just to kind of recap what we talked about, the firearm in particular, it's a force multiplier. Understand that this thing is going to give you a lot more capability, but in the wrong hands, it also gives the attacker some more capability as well. And that's why it's important to get a good holster that thing isn't going to fly out of. Practice with your weapon, drawing your weapon, dry firing your weapon. You recommend an appendix carry, and I think that there's arguments on both sides, but I think your argument's more convincing. I actually carry on my hip, but after you said that, I can't reach my gun on my right hip with my left hand. I can't. I don't have the flexibility for it. So an appendix carry makes a little more sense. And then actually having the confidence to carry it, because most people are so wrapped up in their own life, they don't know you're carrying it. And it should be that way because you don't want to open carry and be the first guy shot when an attacker comes into a building. Now that we kind of wrapped up the guns, let's talk a little bit about knives, because there's people out there that, for better or for worse, they're not going to carry a gun. They don't believe it. They don't think it's right. Or maybe they just don't have the confidence to do it, which is fine. But there's a lot of those people that won't carry a gun that will carry a knife. Is there a specific type of knife that you recommend people carry?
So as far as knives go, they definitely can stop somebody. A big advantage of a knife is that you can carry a knife a lot of places that you can't carry a gun, whether that's due to laws, right? That maybe you can't get a concealed carry permit. There's some states that aren't shall issue states, right? They just don't really give out concealed carry permits. Mm-hmm. Or it might be you have to go through some sort of security checkpoint, and a knife or a pointed object is a lot easier to procure or buy once you're through some sort of checkpoint than a gun is. If you think about jails, right? Inside jails, they're not shooting each other. They're making shanks. They're making knives at pointed objects out of things, and that's what they're using on each other. So you can carry a knife in a lot of places that you maybe couldn't carry a gun, or you can make or purchase a knife a lot easier and a lot faster. One concept that I talk about a lot with people that travel is this idea of a throwaway knife. So say you're flying somewhere, you're not checking a bag, or maybe you are and you don't want to check your gun. You land there, you go to Walmart, you get a cheap kitchen knife, you make a sheath out of it with either the box it came in or some cardboard from the dumpster out back, right? Make a sheath out of some cardboard and tape, and now you have a $6 or $7 knife, the way to protect yourself for the week while you're on vacation. Before you leave, it's a throwaway knife. You ditch the knife, you go through your checkpoint again, and you're on your way home. So knives are readily available all over the place. There's definitely knives that are better than others at their job to defend yourself with, but most knives are capable enough to end somebody's life with. I've done in training, we've done work with pig cadavers, which are pretty closely represent a human body. They're actually a little bit denser and a little bit thicker, so it's a little harder to get into. And I've seen training knives. So these are metal training knives. So they're rounded tips. There's no sharp edges. They're blunt edges. I've seen training knives go through the rib cage of a pig cadaver. I've also seen a butter knife do it. So it doesn't take that much to get through. The other thing with a knife is most of us have been using knives as tools our entire lives. People are very comfortable with knives. You now just have to take that tool and weaponize it. So it's typically a little easier for people to learn how to use a knife and to actually become efficient with it. Really anybody can pick up a knife and use it. There's definitely tactics in targeting that will make you more efficient, but people tend to be a little bit more comfortable with knives, which is why I think they're a good option as well.
So before we get into how to use that knife in a self-defense situation, in particular, like switchblade, a collapsible blade, fixed blade, is there a knife, like if you're like, okay, you got to go and buy, you're going to carry a knife, I recommend this type of knife?
Yeah, so I'm always going to recommend, if we're going best case scenario, you get to decide a fixed blade knife. So that's a knife that doesn't fold. It's open. It's one piece, right? They'll call them full tang knives. So it's one piece of steel that runs from the tip of the knife all the way to the back end of it. Sometimes it's covered with a handle, but it's a single piece of steel that runs the whole way through. That's going to be your strongest knife. Folders definitely can work. Like I said, lots of people have been killed with $5 Chinese gas station folding knives. But if we get to decide, right, we're at home, we're allowed to carry a knife, you have some money to spend on a knife, I definitely recommend a fixed blade knife. Not only is it stronger, because a lot of times with those folding knives, when they go in, there's a lock on them that keeps them open. A lot of times that lock will kind of get disengaged because they're not very well made, and then that knife's blade is now collapsing onto your fingers and not going into the target. Not only are they a lot stronger, the fixed blade knives, but they're quicker. Once you pull that knife out and it's out of the sheath, the knife's now ready to use. There's no pulling it out and trying to get it open. Another thing with the folders, sometimes you try to deploy it and it doesn't open the whole way. So now it's not locked open. Same thing, you go to put it into something or someone and that blade's collapsing down on your fingers. So best case scenario, you get to pick, I'd pick a fixed blade knife.
And then when you're using that knife in a self-defense situation, what am I trying to do? Because I know with the gun, you said basically between the shoulder blades, that's what I'm aiming for. If I have to use a knife, if I have to use a knife in a self-defense situation, what does that look like? What am I trying to hit this guy with?
With knives, we typically like to plunge, like stab, rather than slash. You'll see a lot of knife art or knife fighting where they do a lot of slashing, and that's usually developed in the Philippines. In warmer climates where people carry around with them agricultural blades. So they're big, heavy knives, and they're using them on people that are wearing very thin, light clothing. So those slashes, it's a big, heavy knife. They may be able to take somebody's arm off with this big agricultural knife. In the United States of America, we're not carrying around typically big agricultural blades. We're carrying around small pocket knives, right? 1 3/4 inches to maybe 3.5 inch blade. Much smaller, much lighter knives. The other thing is, in lots of parts of the country, in lots of seasons, we're wearing more than like a tank top, right? You're wearing thick, heavy jackets, hoodies, like Zach, you have a hoodie on today. Well, my light little 2.5 inch blade knife may not slash through your hoodie, through your skin, and get deep enough to hit something where it's actually going to affect you. So what I like to use is stabbing and ripping. So we're going in and then we're pulling through to get the knife out to create a bigger wound channel once we're already inside of the flesh. So mostly stabbing and ripping instead of slashing. The only time I would recommend slashing is if we're starting at the face. The reason you may want to start at the face is because your head, your face, it bleeds a lot. And the thing with knives, people don't always understand that they've been stabbed. I've heard lots of situations where people get stabbed in the chest, they have a collapsed lung, and they think they just got punched took a body shot hard, and they got the wind knocked out of them. I've also seen situations where people get done with some sort of physical altercation, which they thought was just a street fight, like a hand-to-hand fight, and they thought they peed their pants. They look down, their pants are covered in blood. Their femoral arteries squirting blood, right? Because they got stabbed, and they didn't even realize it. So by starting at the face and slashing across the face, you're getting blood coming down past this person's eyes. A lot of times that's enough to stop the threat, right? To take the motivation out of them. They just got slashed across the face. You want to be careful actually trying to plunge into thick boned areas because knives will get stuck. They'll get stuck in bones. They'll get stuck in joints. And there are some tricks to work that knife out of being stuck. But if we can not get it stuck in the first place, a lot of times getting the knife out is going to cause the tip to break off of it. We want to try to avoid that in the first place. So if we're going to slash, we'd be slashing to the face and starting there. Other than that, for targeting, going into the carotid arteries in the neck, there's not a ton of protection between the outside world and those carotid arteries. Your biggest protection there is going to be your jaw. That's why naturally when people feel threatened, their chin starts to go down. That chin going down is starting to cover those carotid arteries, and you're also bunching up a little bit more flesh in front of them. So going to the carotid arteries, a lot of times to make that more effective, we can lift the chin with something like a palm strike. You're lifting their chin up out of the way, exposing those arteries closer to the skin. You're going to get deeper into there, and it's going to cause that, it's going to take effect a lot quicker and stop the fight a lot faster. Other than that, those go down into the subclavian arteries. So if you feel above your collarbone, that dip right there, you can plunge in right there to get to another artery. And then from there, we can go into the chest to go for the lungs or for the heart. When you see videos of somebody getting stabbed in the chest and you don't see them bleeding, but they go down very quickly and they're not squirting blood and they just drop, what you're usually seeing is they got stabbed to the heart. The heart is surrounded by a pericardial sac. And again, just like I don't have law experience, I don't have a ton of medical experience. I've done a few medical management classes, like field medical management, if you get shot, if you get stabbed, but I don't have a medical degree. But your heart's surrounded by this pericardium or pericardial sac. And what happens is your heart starts bleeding into that sac. The sac fills up and it puts pressure on your heart to the point where it can't keep beating, and you basically go into cardiac arrest. So if you see someone get stabbed in the chest and they drop pretty quickly, it's probably because they got stabbed in the heart. And that's probably your quickest fight ender with a knife. Other than that, going into the ribs, through the ribs into the lungs, you can puncture their lung. Your chest cavity has negative pressure. That's how your lungs are able to expand and contract. When you put a hole into that, it equalizes pressure with the outside world, and that's where you'll get what's called a sucking chest wound. The air rushes into your chest cavity. Now your lungs collapsed, and now you can't breathe. On top of that, you have a nerve, a vein, and an artery that's running underneath every rib. So a lot of times that can cause blood to then go into the ribs, which is going to exacerbate the effect of getting stabbed there.
Gruesome.
Yeah, it's just gruesome, dude. Jesus. But I mean, it's self-defense, dude.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real. That's an unfortunate reality we live in, man, that like you could be a victim of violent crime and you got to find a way to defend yourself. Man, I just don't know if I could stab somebody. Like I have a hard enough time thinking about shooting somebody, but to like cut somebody in the face and stab them in the neck, that's just like, that is dark shit right there.
And that's something you have to come to reality with if you're carrying a knife for self-defense. With a gun, there's a lot more disconnect, especially if you're shooting somebody at distance. Mm-hmm. With a knife, and like I said, I've done work with pig cadavers training, and you feel that knife going the whole way in, and you're deeply connected with it. I've talked about this in some self-defense classes where we'll teach going to the eyes, like gouging to the eyes with the fingers, and people get a little bit woozy, gouging like a Bob dummy's eyes out, but they have like a knife, they carry a knife that they're expecting to use for self-defense. It's like, it's going to be a little bit worse than, gouging Bob's eyes out.
A rubberized like body with no arms and a mean scowl.
Since you're talking about knives, this would be a cool thing to bring up, and I don't know if we're allowed to talk about it. If we're not, we won't bring it up. We'll cut it out. But you're in fabrication right now for your own product, your own knife. What made you want to do that, and what differences did you add in or subtract from knives that are on the marketplace right now?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a knife. It's going much slower than
it always does.
I expected.
Costs more time, more money, and it's slower.
Yes, I've never manufactured something or gotten something made like that in my life, so I'm learning a lot. But my idea with the design was I wanted something that everybody could carry, right? It's a self-defense knife, but at its base form, it's a tool. It's a tool that you can use to open boxes, to do everyday tasks with, cut up like an apple you're eating, and you can also weaponize this tool. Thing with knives is, some people talk like, I carry this knife for self-defense, this knife for opening stuff because I want to keep my self-defense knife sharp. It's like the more, just like we talked about handling the gun and getting comfortable with the gun, more you handle that knife and you use it as a tool instead of just a weapon, the more comfortable you're going to be with it and the quicker you're going to be able to get it out. You know where it's at in your hand. I say there's guys that, some older guys that have been carrying around a folding pocket knife for 50 years and they use it every day. I was watching a guy the one day, he pulls his knife out, it's not even thinking, he's like looking at something else and he starts trimming his fingernails with it. Like that guy's going to have a much better, easier time and be much more successful getting that knife out and weaponizing this tool that he's always carried on him, that he's always used, than somebody that has this like fancy $300 self-defense knife that they never pull out. They maybe train with it, for an hour when they first got it and they haven't pulled it out since then. So using it as a tool. So that's what I wanted to create. It was a tool that can be used for everyday tasks and it can also be weaponized. I took a lot of fixed blades that are on the market today and I've used a lot of knives. I carried a knife every day long before I carried a gun, and I still carry a knife very frequently. And I basically picked apart this piece of the handle on this knife. I like this part of the blade on this knife. This here, I don't like this part of it, and I just kind of compiled them into one knife. Through training, I've learned some things on what to look for in a knife. Like I said, most knives will work, but there are things that make some knives a little bit more efficient than others. Handle material. Is this handle going to become slippery when it gets bloody or when it gets sweaty? Sharpening choils on blades. So a lot of blades have a little like a little half circle right at the end of the blade before it hits the handle. Something like that can get tangled up in clothing, can get tangled up in flesh and make it a lot harder to get that knife out or pull it through someone. Also, like very pronounced guards so that your hand doesn't slip over the blade. That helps your hand not slip over the blade. But what I see a lot is once that goes inside and now this person's moving around, that knife gets turned a little bit and now you're not able to get the knife out because that big wide guard on the handle is now stuck inside that, underneath the skin or underneath some bone. So trying to have a taper where it gets thinner as you get down towards the tip of the knife rather than having thick points up at the top.
So we started to organically move into what you're doing with your business. But before we talk more about the Defense Lab, just to recap the knives, carrying a knife, fixed blade is probably best. I'm assuming you also carry it in front?
Yes.
Okay. So because it gives you options. So that's kind of a crossover between that and a gun. It's also a force multiplier, obviously not as much as a firearm, but it's still going to give you options, but it also gives your attacker options. When you're using a knife in a defensive situation, if you're going to slash, go for the face. If you're going to stab and rip, you go for the neck, and you basically work your way down from there. You're also in development of making a knife that can be used for self-defense as well as everyday tasks. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And obviously when that comes out, we'll post all about it, because I think people need to know, like, okay, this is something that some dude developed that actually is actually in the self-defense situation, in the self-defense business. So since you're in the self-defense business, what is the Defense Lab and what do you kind of specialize in terms of one-on-one, group, corporate? What is the Defense Lab and what does that business look like for the everyday consumer?
Yeah. As far as training goes, right now I'm running seminars and private lessons. So single person private lessons, small group private lessons. And then with the seminars, I do two types of seminars. I do open enrollment seminars where I put the seminar together and I put it out so anybody can sign up. And I also do what I would call closed enrollment seminars, where if you guys have a group of guys that want to do a seminar, and we do it kind of like a private group. The difference between the seminars and the private lessons, really, the seminars are more of a comprehensive overview. They're between 2.5 to 4 hours, and it gives you a general idea. It gives you some things that you can start applying into your life. You can practice at home with your wife or whoever, your friends. But being realistic, you're probably not going to come take even a 4-hour seminar, never practice that again, and be able to hit that stuff outside. You need to be practicing this stuff. There's no magic trick. There's no, easy button. You have to practice this stuff just like with everything else.
So it's definitely comprehensive, and I think it just reiterates the point that you mentioned earlier, that you don't rise to the occasion. that you fall to the level of your training, and there's definitely a lot to train. And I think it also parallels well to, you have to, quote unquote, for lack of better terms, dress for the job that you want. Just because you were a boxer, or just because you were a wrestler, or just because you were Uncle Rico and you could throw a football over that mountain when you were 22.
Clear over pigskin, clear over those mountains.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're going to rise to the occasion when somebody puts a gun in your face. I know one thing that really shocked me, and I've been to Danny's seminar. I took one of his seminars. Me and him went out shooting yesterday. He's a professional in his craft, and he's great at how he teaches. One thing that really surprised me was the one when we did the live rounds at the end, and that woman had space. She was able to present her gun. She had a clear shot at taking me out. She didn't take it. I was attacking her, pressing her. She was on the ground. So you need to practice, right? Just like you said. And I definitely wouldn't have known the very little bit that I do know if I wouldn't have taken the time to go to your seminar and spend time with you training and pick your brain. So it's important. It's important to learn this stuff and learn it from somebody who's in the craft.
Definitely get out there and get trained. There's some situations when people, say things like, you're put in such a bad situation, like, someone puts a gun to your head, and why even train this, right? Your chance of surviving this is so slim. It's like, maybe it is, but if I don't do anything, I'm going to get killed.
And the chance is zero.
Yeah, I'd rather go out swinging.
There's some level of personal responsibility to it.
Yeah, especially if you have a family.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a family and you're head of that family, you're in charge of keeping everybody safe.
And it's the training not only fosters the skill set necessary to defend yourself in a combative situation, it also develops a violence of mind. If you have no idea what you're doing, then good luck. But if you have some skills to fall back on, your ability to muster those skills when it matters, that's the violence of mind that's developed by the repetitions of actually drilling this, working with your business, going to jiu-jitsu and having a live application for a combat environment. All of that, if you're listening and you're like, man, I don't know if I could do it when push came to shove. Well, I'll tell you what, you definitely won't do it if you have no skills and you haven't even tried to foster that violence of mind necessary when push comes to shove and you're faced with an attacker, when push comes to shove and you have a knife in your ribs, when push comes to shove and maybe somebody brandishes a firearm at you. So being able to train in the context of how you'll use it is how you can start to develop that confidence and violence of mind necessary to survive a situation or defend your family when it matters most. So Danny, before we wrap this up, the Defense Lab, somebody that's interested in self-defense, whether it's themselves, whether it's a seminar, whether it's a small group, whether they have a corporate event, they want to bring all their people in and get you in there to work with all the people in their business. How do they get a hold of you? How can they actually employ the Defense Lab?
Yeah, so I'm online. My website's the-defense-lab.com, and I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. It's The Defense Lab, all one word, as well as YouTube, The Defense Lab, all one word.
That's it, guys. Look up The Defense Lab, give them a follow, contact them if you need anything, and let's wrap this thing up.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
For sure. Again, guys, this is a More Complete Beast podcast where we sat down with Daniel Contraguerro and we talked all things self-defense. We talked about hand-to-hand combat. We talked about firearms. We talked about knives. We talked about how to use them and utilize them in a defensive situation. Remember, if you're interested in working with Danny, you need to follow him on Instagram, on Facebook, and go to his website, the-defense-lab.com. Again, that's the-defense-lab.com. This is a More Complete Beast podcast. Leave us a 5-star review, share this podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode.